Power of Thinking Big story of a poor boy with empty pockets, powerful motivational story. He stood at the edge of the broken bridge, wind howling through the hollow night, cold dust clinging to his torn shirt, and fear rising like a storm inside his chest. Empty pockets, empty house, empty hopes. In that moment, the world felt brutally loud and painfully quiet at the same time, as if life itself was whispering, "You have nothing," and yet demanding, "What will you do now?" That boy's name was Ion, and the story of how he learned to think bigger than hunger, bigger than shame, and bigger than poverty began on this very night when the darkness seemed determined to swallow him whole. If you believe kindness, faith, and second chances can change even the hardest life, then like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel and Stia, because someone out there needs hope today. Ion had grown up in a tiny one-room house at the far edge of the town, where cracked walls told silent stories of unpaid rent, unpaid dreams, and winters that bit like wolves. His father had fallen sick early in his childhood and never fully recovered. His mother washed dishes in several homes, returning each night with tired hands and a quiet smile that tried to hide the fractures of worry. Ion often pretended to sleep when she cried softly in the corner, covering her mouth with her dupatta so no one else would hear, but those tears had carved marks on his heart deeper than hunger ever could. Poverty had a way of making the days feel endless, but the future feel impossibly short. School was both his escape and his greatest humiliation. He arrived wearing faded shoes that sometimes split open, holding notebooks whose pages had long since been filled and erased again. He would sit quietly, always at the back, always hoping no one would notice the trembling hands that betrayed his fear whenever fees were mentioned or books were checked. He was never the loudest, never the bravest, but his mind gathered everything like treasure. He loved learning because it was the only place where no one could stop him, where he felt bigger than his circumstances. But dreams, when kept inside a poor boy's chest, often begin as a spark that no one else can see, and for years that spark flickered quietly, unseen and ignored. When his father's condition worsened, everything collapsed faster than Ion could understand. Medicines cost more than the meals they could afford. Neighbors whispered and turned away. Relatives promised help and vanished into excuses. One evening, the landlord came with sharp words and colder eyes, warning them that they were now living only on borrowed time in a house that no longer felt like theirs. That night, Ion lay awake watching shadows on the ceiling, realizing that childhood had ended silently, without ceremony, replaced by a weight he could not set down. The next morning, pockets truly empty for the first time, he went searching for work. He carried no certificates, no references, only determination stitched painfully into his heart. He tried at the mechanic's shop, at the tea stall, at the warehouse by the dusty highway. Some laughed, some shrugged, some simply looked through him as though he were made of air. By evening, his feet hurt and his hope trembled. When he returned home, he found his mother sitting beside his father, holding his hand like she was afraid time might yank him away if she let go. Hunger pressed heavily at his ribs, but he said nothing. Silence became his sacrifice. Days blended into each other. Ion worked wherever anyone paid, even if it was just a few coins. He carried crates, swept floors, lifted sacks heavier than his own body. He endured insults, heat, and exhaustion that seeped into his bones. Yet inside, something started to shift, free. He noticed people. Wealthy business owners, middle-class shopkeepers, even struggling fruit sellers, who had once decided to think beyond their limits and build something of their own. He began studying them in quiet detail, the way they planned, the way they spoke, the way they refused to let circumstances choose the size of their dreams. Slowly, the thought formed, perhaps poverty was not a cage made of iron, but a cage made of belief. One afternoon, at a market brimming with voices and dust, Ion saw a boy his age selling cold lemonade, not from an expensive shop, but from a small cart made of scrap wood. The boy had painted bright yellow letters by hand. People stopped. People smiled. People paid. From nothing, the boy had created something. That night, Ion could not sleep. The spark inside him burned brighter, restless, whispering that even empty pockets can carry big ideas. Still, fear fought back. Who was he to dream? Who would trust him? Where would he get even the smallest amount of money to begin? Voices from the past echoed mercilessly. "You are poor. Stay where you belong." Yet he remembered his mother's tired smile, the soft lines on his father's face, the house that was slowly fading into uncertainty. He made a decision that frightened him. He would not wait for someone to rescue them. He would think bigger than his fear, bigger than the broken road beneath his feet. He began gathering small pieces of discarded cardboard, old bottles, and metal scraps from the neighborhood. People laughed when they saw him, assuming he had surrendered to a rag picker's life. But in the quiet corners of his mind, a plan was forming. He cleaned and reshaped everything patiently, creating simple handmade organizers, bottle planters, and tiny, decorative items. Then he walked to the weekly roadside market, heart trembling, and placed them neatly on a cloth. For long hours no one looked. Dust gathered. Sun burned his neck. His confidence cracked. But just as despair began to coil around him, an elderly man stopped, picked up a small planter, and smiled. He paid. He praised. He encouraged. It wasn't about the amount. It was about the impossible becoming possible. Slowly, little by little, customers began to appear. Ion listened to them carefully, improving each design, learning quietly, failing quietly, growing quietly. With every coin, he set some aside for medicine, some for food, and a precious tiny part to reinvest in better materials. Over time, his handmade goods became known for care and creativity. A kind shopkeeper allowed him a small corner of his store. Another introduced him to someone who sold items online. The world began to widen, not because luck had arrived, but because he had decided to think beyond his current reality. Yet life, even when it begins to rise, does not forget to test. One night, a storm tore through the town. Water flooded the streets, ruining most of Ion's stored items and damaging the little corner he used. The next morning felt like a cruel rewind, dragging him back toward nothingness. Standing among soaked cardboard and broken hopes, he felt the familiar choke of helplessness. His mother touched his shoulder, eyes full of courage she herself barely possessed. In that moment, he realized something vital. Big thinkers are not those who never fall. They are those who refuse to stay fallen. He rebuilt. He learned about sturdier materials, about saving with purpose, about resilience. He observed that people were drawn to stories behind products. So he began attaching small handwritten notes about recycling, hope, and second chances. Customers began sharing his items, telling others about the boy who turned garbage into beauty. Orders increased, then doubled, then multiplied. He hired 2 other poor boys who had once stood just as lost as he had. Together they worked late into the nights, tired but grateful, whispering their dreams into the quiet. Ion's father finally received better treatment. Medicines arrived on time. Rent was paid. The landlord's once cold voice softened. His mother's hands, once always trembling with exhaustion, now carried a gentler peace. But more than the money, something deeper had changed. Ion had discovered that the size of our lives is shaped not only by what we possess, but by what we dare to imagine when everything looks impossible. Years passed. The small idea grew into a small business, then into something larger, reaching new cities, inspiring workshops, creating jobs for people who had once been invisible. Ion spoke to children in local schools, telling them that dreams are not property reserved for the rich, and that thinking big is not arrogance. It is an act of faith in the possibility of tomorrow. He carried with him the memory of those empty pockets, not as shame, but as proof that the human spirit is bigger than circumstance. And yet, even at the height of success, he often returned to the broken bridge where his story had begun. He would stand there quietly and breathe, remembering the night when he thought there was nothing left, and realizing now that emptiness had been the starting point, not the ending. If this story of courage, struggle, and the power of thinking big touched your heart even a little, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Honestia, because your support helps stories like this reach people who need strength. Before we end, I have a special request. Write in the comments what a thinking bigs to you and what dream you still hold quietly inside your heart. Ion's journey reminds us that we may wake up some days with pockets that feel painfully empty, but we are never empty when our minds carry faith, our hearts hold compassion, and our dreams refuse to shrink. Poverty can take food from the table, shoes from the feet, comfort from the night, but it can never steal the courage to rise again unless we surrender it ourselves. And somewhere in every struggle, there is a door waiting to be opened by someone brave enough to believe they deserve more than what they see. That is the power of thinking big. It does not magically change life overnight, but it changes the person facing life. And that changes everything.